Welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast, an exploration of the blurry line separating our physical world from our abstract realities. Conversations and stories, myths and reality, science and the gods we worship, the esoteric and the everyday. Come explore with me. John Bucher, welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast.
It's such a pleasure to be here. I love the name of this podcast. It intrigued me the first time I heard it, and really excited about a conversation with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I've actually gone into this live on a recording, but people do often ask me about the name and Explorer Poet. So it's a couple of things. I don't know if you remember at the end of the movie Braveheart, when William Wallace is already dead, and then it's Robert the Bruce who's going to lead them into battle. And he says, I want to say it's still Mel Gibson's voice as the narrator, but he says they fought like warrior poets. And I always liked that, so the poet part. But then also there's this book, it's a true story about Ernest Shackleton and his voyage to the Antarctic. And they left Europe about a month before World War I started. And so they went down to Antarctica on this ship called the Endurance. And so the book, if you want to read it, is Endurance. It's an amazing book. But the whole crew got stranded in the Antarctic, and they ended up living on small islands for about 2 years. And in the end, every single one of them survived. So it's a remarkable story. But the way the way that we have the information about the story is that they were all keeping journals the entire time. And so I also had this idea of, when I was reading it, I just thought, wow, people used to write, even in their journals, they used to write so poetically. And so I thought of them as explorer poets. And so kind of mash those two ideas together, warrior poets, explorer poets. And that's where it came from.
That. I'm so glad you explained the origin of the title. I've long been fascinated by warrior poets and explorers. And so to see you marry those two ideas, I feel like that there's maybe a certain archetype of person that lives in the world that, is a warrior, a poet, and an explorer. And I would consider myself an embodiment of that archetype. Along with so many others,
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, you've definitely explored a lot, and just looking at your website online, and then also at the Joseph Campbell Foundation website online, I could see that you do all sorts of things all over the place. And so you are an author. You've have all this experience with different groups, creating stories with HBO and DC Comics and Paramount and Nickelodeon. You co-host your own podcast, the Skeleton Key podcast, and then you're also the executive director of the JCF. And it's a lot. How do you do it all? Yeah, when do you sleep?
I have shared this with a number of people before, but my life got so much easier a few years ago when I rejected the idea of my life boiling down to a single job description. And I started embracing my life and my work as an ecosystem. And, on different days, I'm in different parts of that ecosystem. And I found that to be much more aligned with who I am as a human being, because I have a wide variety of interests. And I think this goes back to this idea of the poet and the warrior and the explorer. To quote, more wonderful literature, I contain multitudes. And I think many of us make the mistake when we meet someone new in our lives of trying to perhaps just get to the essence and boil them down to a single idea or a single activity or whatever their job is or how they make money. And I think that's a big mistake. I think we're so much more interesting as human beings when we consider the breadth of what the way that we walk through the world. And so I would say that we make the time to do what we really want to do in the world. And um, there's always reasons to delay the things that we really want to do. But um, I am a fan of eating. I love to eat. And I never have to remind myself to go and eat. I always make time to eat during the day. I'm also a fan of the Los Angeles Dodgers. I like baseball, and I seem to always find time to catch a game or to follow what's going on with the Dodgers. And I think, whatever you decide you are interested in the world, it also means deciding what you're not going to pay attention to and what you're not going to follow. And um, I made a decision a couple of years ago to follow a lot less of politics and political events because I found it becoming really detrimental to my happiness and to my uh, the wonder from which I moved with in the world. And so, I've said no to some things that I used to make time for. But I think all of us, choose what we have time to do. How about you, Josh? Do you, I'm guessing there are a lot of things you have to say no to in order to do this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I had to work really hard to structure my life the way that I wanted it, and so I've been pretty fortunate that it worked out for me, but I had to take risks and I had to put a lot of effort into it, and yeah, I spend most of my days. I write in the mornings. I try to do podcasts in the middle of the day, and I spend the rest of the day working in the yard. We have some land here in Idaho, and spending time with the kids. We also homeschool, and so I've just kind of structured everything around what it is that I actually want to be doing, what I value. And while I need you need economic resources in your life, I don't want to base my entire life on trying to get as big of a bank account as I can get, because I just don't think that that's not the path to, the way that you describe just doing what you want to do and cutting out the things that that maybe take your energy away from that. It sounds very Campbellian. Joseph Campbell liked to say to follow your bliss, right? And so you probably know that well.
I do. I mean, it's funny because I've spent a lot of my life studying Campbell and his work and his writing, and um, he is known to people, certainly for the hero's journey, but probably a close second is for this phrase, "follow your bliss." And um, I always thought it was kind of funny. A little later, he said, "I should have said follow your blisters because it takes a lot of work to follow your bliss." And I think sometimes when people hear that phrase, "follow your bliss," um, they can take it the wrong way. And I think Campbell was sometimes concerned that people would take it the wrong way. Um, it doesn't mean spend 12 hours a day eating Rocky Road ice cream, even though that might be pretty blissful for a while. It really has to do with following what inside your soul is aligned with the tune of the universe, and those things that bring true joy, those things that bring and rise curiosity within you. I think those are the things that there truly is bliss around. It's not even just what makes you happy, because I think happy is a fleeting emotion sometimes. I can get very happy having a nice big plate of spaghetti, but the next morning I want something else to eat. The happiness doesn't linger for very long. So I think when we look at that bliss that Joseph Campbell was talking about, we have to consider the sustainability of what we're following. What is it going to produce in the long term in me? How is it going to cause me to um, move differently in the world? And how is it going to be of service to the world? How's the world going to be better because I'm following my bliss? I think when we start to ask those questions, following our bliss becomes much more of a sacred act than an act of hedonism or an act of selfishness. Um, there's sort of an inherent thing that is within that phrase, follow your bliss, and that is identifying what your bliss is. Because I think that's a really difficult task that takes a number of years to really determine what it is that brings life to you. And not just hobbies we enjoy or things that we do to make money or things that we find to pass the time, but what truly brings life to you. I'm involved with a group that I'm working with called the Human Aliveness Lab. And at the core of what the Human Aliveness Lab does is this quote from Joseph Campbell. And it's one of his quotes that probably is right up there in my top two or three favorites. And he basically said that he didn't believe people were so much looking for the meaning of life as much as they were the experience of being alive and the rapture that can accompany that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think when we explore different ways of living, when we explore different ideas we're interested in, I think we're really searching for that experience of life and not just existence, but something that is nourishing to the innermost parts of us that we can't even truly articulate or may not even have language for, but we know within us when those parts of us are being satiated.
Yeah, yeah. I really like the language that you use to describe all of that. It's very similar to the way I look at things. And you have a background also in depth psychology, correct?
I
So,
do, yeah.
yeah. So you are also familiar with the idea of the unconscious. And I think that a lot of what you're talking about is the kind of things that bubble up from the unconscious to us. And, like a almost people often talk about art and creativity as if it's play. And in some way it is, because it's kind of following that eternal curiosity that you have, which is very childlike. And so when I think about all this topic, following your bliss and listening to your soul and pursuing things that actually bring greater value to the world, I even like the way you say happiness is just an emotion. It's a great emotion, but it's just an emotion, and all emotions are fleeting. You can't maintain the same emotional state even from 1 hour to the next every day. So the idea that you should be in one continuous state is just silly. But the way that I think about this often is I call it proximal goals and psyche goals. And so those things that bubble up inside of us, there's always some, in the same way that we watch a movie or we read a story, we hear a song, and we consciously tell ourselves why we like it, when really it's probably a deep unconscious connection that's making us appreciate it. What ends up happening is we get these goals in life. So it may be, oh, I want to get married, or I want to start a business, I want to write a book, I want to travel. There are all these things that bubble up inside of us, and we often kind of push them down. We go, no, that's, I need to stay on track. I need to stay focused. But these things keep coming up. And for years, you can feel like, yeah, maybe I should just go out on my own and become an entrepreneur. Or maybe I should start painting like I always thought I should paint. And what I think happens is that the psyche gives you these goals, these desires that have objectives to them. So for example, if you're going to start a business, and you're sitting at your job and you're wasting away emotionally and mentally, and you're just you're just paying the bills, but there's a part of you that's like, I should start a business. The psyche is trying to get you to do something, and it gives you this proximal goal, because in your conscious mind you can look at that and say, yeah, if I started a business, I could be successful, I could make money, and then I could do good with in the world. I could bring value to the world and to others, and I could help others. But those are the proximal goals the psyche is kind of seeding you with. What it really wants you to do is to pursue those things that are bubbling up so that it can find ways to help you grow and integrate parts of yourself that they're trapped in some way, but something about the psyche, something in the unconscious thinks that if you pursue that, you can bring that into the totality of yourself. And so that's why I call them, like, we consciously think of them as the conscious goals, I would say, are proximal, but the deep
Yes.
underlying purpose is the psyche trying to achieve some kind of growth.
Absolutely. I really like that. And I think you're spot on, with this. I like the way you describe these proximal goals. One of the ways that I approach myth and depth psychology is through narratology and through storytelling, because they allow us to put concepts into metaphor in a way that I believe makes these very abstract ideas sometimes easier to wrap our heads around. And in a story, when we have subtext, it is never spoken directly about. It is never explicitly discussed. However, there's always the theme of the story that is connected to this subtextual piece. And I think the same is true in our lives. I believe that when we become better connected to the subtext of our own lives through the unconscious world, and as Jung, discussed making the unconscious conscious, I think we start to get some sense of the themes in our own lives. And when we discover the themes that we truly value and those ideas which are really important to us in the world, I think it brings a greater sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. I am fascinated right now by the discussions going around a movie that's coming out in the next month or so. And it's the movie Superman. And there's been a lot from a storytelling perspective about Superman throughout the years of is Superman a projection of the ego? Is it our idea of what the perfect perfectly attuned psyche might look like, or an individuated human being? Is it a metaphor for that? Is it a ideal of the supernatural? And most recently, I heard the director and the writer of this new film coming out about Superman say it's actually a film about kindness. It's a story about kindness. And I'll tell you, that hit me in the heart really hard, because kindness is a value that I really treasure. It's a value that I was raised with, and it's something that I believe is sorely lacking in our world today. And so when I hear that there's a story being told, that the subtext is around kindness, I resonate with that in really deep ways on a soul level. There are other stories, that are about the reconciliation with one's parents. And for other people, that may be the story that the subtext really resonates with their soul. But I think there's this interesting relationship between the unconscious and the idea of subtext within narratology that is really worth exploring.
Yeah, I agree. I actually speak about this, maybe using different terminology, but I speak something similar, where there are stories in in every generation, but take our time period now. There are stories that seem to resonate with the people, and So they get told over and over. And I mean, to some extent, it's financial in Hollywood, repeating the same stories over and over. But the finances wouldn't be available if the population didn't connect with the stories over and over and over. And so what I think is happening, similar to what I said before, we go and watch a movie, say it's Superman, we go and watch a movie and we we have like an emotional reaction to it. Our body reacts to this story. And so we either say we like it or we don't like it. Well, let's say we like it. You have this physical response. It's in your body and so you're like, I like this. So then consciously you have to think, well, why do I like it? And you might not actually ask yourself that question, but you do answer it. You say, oh, I like this character, or I like that character, or I like the action. For me, a lot of times I like a movie because of the cinematography and the soundtrack. And there's all these things that you can come up with that this is why I like it. Or sometimes it is the theme that you think the movie is actually trying to portray, the message. But what I believe is that underlying all of that, below the conscious level, below all these answers that we're trying to give, what's happening is that our body is connecting with the story in a sense. An unconscious part of us is connecting with the story, and it's reacting to the story. Because if our unconscious couldn't connect to the story, I don't think we're going to have a very strong connection to it at all. Like boredom is not the kind of emotion you walk out of a movie saying, you experience boredom and you say, I really enjoyed that movie. You don't even, it's so much easier to explain why you don't like a movie, because you can just say it was boring. It didn't grab me. It didn't connect with me. But I think that, from a big picture perspective, the way that humans think is in stories, and we've had these evolving stories going on forever. Like Joseph Campbell does a great job in his Masks of God series, showing how this process takes place where the story just keeps changing, but we keep connecting to it. And I think deep down, the unconscious connects with stories because it sees that that's a story that can help us grow. In the same way that these proximal goals work for individuals, I think that collectively as a society, we attach ourselves to stories, even myths or religions, the myths that religions are based on, because at some level, when we finally figure out the story, it will help us grow and become better or more conscious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think this is, myth can be expressed in a lot of different ways. Myth comes through ritual. It comes through, many forms, but the way that myth has been passed down, I would say most consistently, has been through storytelling and through the repetition of certain stories that were passed down from generation to generation. And I do believe that there's something about the art form of story that is able to speak to the soul in a way that bypasses logic and bypasses the cognitive process. Sometimes it might just be the rhythm of the voice of the storyteller. Sometimes it might be the way that they open up a character. But many times it's just something mysterious, something that we have trouble putting language to, that hits us. And I really like what you said there about it being difficult to describe what we like about a story sometimes, but it's very easy to describe what we dislike if we were bored or some negative emotion comes up. It can be really difficult to say what we like. And we might say we like the cinematography, we like the writing, we like the music, but there is I would suggest an alchemical magic to especially cinematic storytelling that combines um, words and images and music and many different art forms that come together and alchemically produce something greater than the sum of its parts. And I think this is mythic. I think it's why we tie alchemy to myth is that we look at something that tends to exceed the logical reason that we ascribe to other parts of the human experience. But when it comes to myth and the interaction of the soul with myth, especially through stories, there's something mystic that happens. There's something beyond what we're able to easily give words to and describe. And I think that is what draws so many to myth, and it's what draws so many to stories that are told mythically, whether that be, Star Wars or any other, story that's been told through a mythic lens. I think it draws us, and we can see that what is drawing us is not something that we can quickly dismiss or easily make sense of. I can tell you why I like French fries, and that's because they're salty, and I like the taste of salt, right? But I can't tell you why exactly I love the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark so much. There's something in that film that grabs a part of me that I don't have full access to in my conscious self. And I love that. And I love French fries too, but not nearly as much as I love Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've had a lot of conversations with people where I try to explain kind of what I understand about Jungian psychology and what I understand about storytelling in terms of how the human psyche operates, the human mind operates. And it's interesting because even folks who have, say a psychology degree, but it's just kind of more mainstream, more the biomedical definition of psychology, they really struggle to accept the idea of even of the unconscious, or that our dreams might have anything to do with anything in our real life. And it's fascinating to me because the argument is often, oh, that's a little too woo-woo. You're getting too close to spirituality or religion, and we've dismissed that because we live in a rational world now. But I don't think it's irrational to just examine ourselves and think we are essentially what a human being is a bunch of sensors that's just taking in information. And so then if we have these brains that are supposed to be logical or reasonable or rational or whatever, there's got to be some mode on which those minds are operating. And it seems to me that even from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that the way the brain figured out how to contextualize the world in a human way is just through storytelling.
That's really true. And I think science has provided us with wonderful descriptions of how things work. And science answers a lot of the great how in our lives. Science cannot speak to the why. And I think that is something that the realms of philosophy and psychology and mythology have much more to say about the great why in our life. And there's a famous author that said it like this: we can take apart a clock or a wristwatch, and we can take out every gear and every mechanism that causes that clock to work, and we can understand everything about how this gear moves and that gear moves and what actually makes that watch work. We can understand that. But understanding that tells us nothing of what it's like to be late for work. And there's a great difference between analyzing something to understand how it works and understanding why it works the way that it does. I sort of always appreciated, I think it was Cummings that said, if you want the song, don't dissect the goose. That you can easily, take something that is beautiful and you can um, give it an autopsy and take it apart. But I don't think it's ever going to help you understand, the song of that bird, to understand how it produces those sounds. And I understand that there are a number of people whose personalities lend itself to um, the cognitive and the scientific uh, exploration of things, and I'm thankful for that. There's a lot of science that I'm interested in as well, and it's fascinating to me. But I think when we begin to elevate rational thought and science as the only lens worth considering anything in the world, I think we've really done ourselves as human beings a great disservice, because rational science is still a very young human experience. It's a very young human discipline. And if there's one thing we've learned through the scientific process, it's that science is forever ongoing. And what we understand about the way things work now in the universe at large certainly won't be the end of the story. We're going to understand much more. And there are massive, massive gaps for me, even in the deepest scientific explorations and explanations of the universe. It's hard for me to buy that just out of nothing was an explosion, and all of this got here out of an explosion out of nothing. And that's not to say that couldn't happen, but that requires, for me, just as big a leap of faith in that story as someone might have for some other cosmological story about how the universe arrived on the back of a turtle, or something else. So to your earlier point, I have a friend named Harris that has said he believes that storytelling is the operating system of the human brain, that we make sense of the world through stories. And I think in some ways, when we look at our most existential questions of how we got here and what brought us all to this point, um, we're all going to buy into a certain story, and we may say, "Well, my story has scientific facts to back it up," and well, those are the most recent scientific facts that we might have, but it's not the end of the story. We're going to understand more in the future, and imagine if the science of 300 years ago, was where people stopped and just said, "We're not going to understand anything further now. We have science. We understand everything." No, we continue to grow in understanding. So I think as a mythologist, I am interested in humbly approaching the problems of the human experience, and recognizing I have a part to play along with all of these other disciplines that come to the table to bring meaning to the world that we live in.
Yeah. I mean, you speak in such a way that like, this is all the stuff that I'm constantly rambling off to my brother and my wife. This is the same exact ideas. This thing about science being the how, and religion or philosophy, maybe even call it psychology, being the why. I often think it boils down to psychology and physics, and from there, everything else kind of branches out in different directions. But the interesting thing about it is that deep, deep down, the question is almost like the desire to understand the universe, or to understand existence. It's the same desire. It's just being asked in a different question. And when you ask it in a different question, you have to go down a different path to answer that. But I really do, I resonate with what you're saying about even science. It's like science itself is a myth, because in one sense, science is great because if you're actually following the scientific process, which I think in a lot of cases when people say follow the science, they've actually deviated from the scientific process. And so it's becoming more of a myth for them. But in the scientific process, you're not actually you can't actually identify the exact correct answer. What you're doing is removing answers that aren't correct. you're eliminating false answers. And so to say that we've arrived at the final conclusion is hyperbole. And like you're saying, we're going to discover more. Isaac Newton gave us a model of physics that explained the universe until it didn't. And then Albert Einstein gave us a model of the universe that explained, or a model of physics that explained the universe until it didn't. And now we're working on string theory, and we're working on quantum mechanics and stuff that we still haven't figured out and still haven't proven. But yeah, it's very interesting because even in this rational world where we think we have answers for everything, we have what's probably been erroneously termed the Big Bang, is like this idea that everything exploded and out of nothing came everything. But even with the science and the rationality that we have, the discoveries that we have, I still think that everything is mythological in a way, or mythical in a way, because for me, there are three great answers, or three great questions that we don't have answers for. One being that emergence of everything, the Big Bang or the creation, what actually kicked it all off. And then the second one being the emergence of life, which we've investigated a lot. We've got a lot of good ideas, but we don't know exactly how life started. And then the third one being the emergence of intelligent life, or human intelligence, which again, we really don't know how we got tipped over this, this tipping point where we outpaced every other species to such a degree. And even with technology, things like artificial intelligence, they're actually coming up against similar challenges because they don't actually know what makes us so much more intelligent than the rest. And so even in this, and maybe this is another topic that would be interesting, because on your website, you talk about how we need a new story. And I often think, I read Joseph Campbell, I read Carl Jung, and so I'm like looking around and I'm going, what's the new story? What's the new myth? And even in this technological, rational, logical age, we still have these big questions that are unanswerable. And that's where storytelling steps in. That's where myth steps in. The unconscious is going to bubble something up and give us some answer that we all come to accept. Maybe not us, but future generations.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the human being is on a journey. And we, have been on a journey for a long time. And whether we're following the steps of the monomyth or not, I don't know. But I do know that our journey is at a point of real complexity. You might even say we, are on a road of trial of sort, is human beings. But I think that we also have to consider that when it comes to human consciousness, just to build a bit out of your three big questions, that last question about human intelligence speaks a bit to human consciousness. And I think this is something we really have very little understanding of, is human consciousness. And when we think about consciousness, there's a lot of ways that we could approach it. But I think having conversations about how we approach consciousness is helpful right now in this age of artificial intelligence. And we could say that thermostat on the wall over there is conscious to a certain degree, because it is able to respond to the environment around it in a certain way. Now, is that thermostat as conscious as, say, an earthworm? Probably not. Is an earthworm as conscious as a dog or a cat? Most of us would say probably not, although we may develop better science in the future that tells us actually that earthworm is just as conscious. Who knows? But I think when we start looking at levels of consciousness, there certainly seems to be quite a gap between human beings and whatever we might consider to be the next form of consciousness. But it then raises some pretty interesting questions, around if human beings represent the pinnacle of consciousness in the universe because we don't know. We don't know. When we claim to be the highest level of consciousness in the universe, we have to think about what's telling us that. We're human beings telling ourselves that. It's sort of like, but I used to think my brain was the most interesting organ in my body, and then I realized what was telling me that. Maybe my brain has its own little ego that it likes to think it's the most interesting. But I think this is where coming to discussions about consciousness with good readings of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and thinkers like this, especially those that open up Eastern thinking when it comes to consciousness, I think help us to come to discussions of consciousness with an open hand, and to say that we don't know much more than we say we know. There's something within our brains that wants to know, that wants certainty. Our brains crave a certain amount of certainty. And that has been really important for the propagation of our species. However, that craving of certainty can also get us into boxes that become difficult to escape from. When that certainty inflates our ego to the point that we stop investigating possibilities beyond what we're experiencing in that moment, then I think we become trapped by our own certainty. Or at least that's the way it seems to me.
That's certainly how it seems throughout all of history, is that we arrive at some answer and then we sit there on that answer for a very long time. And, assuming that the answer is a story, which usually it is, going back to my previous statement around the unconscious using stories to try to get us somewhere, maybe a group of people who collectively buys into a story long enough, they play out that story, they reenact that story, they have rituals and practices, and eventually I think what happens is that they become the product of that story, which was kind of the goal from the beginning. In our modern world, we're the product of at least 2,000 years of Christianity, and then going back farther than that, all this Greek and Egyptian and Roman influence. And really what our Western world has been doing, it seems, is pushing us more and more to an individual state. Whereas, if you compare it to the East, they're more of a collective mindset, and not just a mindset, like a collective ideology in a way, and we're more of an individualistic ideology. But 2,000 years into the Christian experiment or the Christian myth, worshiping a God who's an individual, trying our best to be like that God, worship is like a form of emulation of trying to be like something. And so once you've done that for so long, it seems that some people kind of look around and go like, oh, I think I'm an individual. Like and then, I think this is just a modern example of what happens once the myth has kind of run its course, meaning it's gotten people to the goal, or at least close to it, where you go, I don't need this same set of rituals, this same set of beliefs anymore, because now I'm the thing that the myth was trying to get me to. And so then you turn and you start looking towards what's coming down the road next, because there's going to have to be something. The big question that I have in my mind is, if we're all individuals, how do we collectively accept whatever that thing is coming down the pipeline?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
This
I'm
is
just
big.
rambling at this point, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, it's something that actually I've done quite a bit of thinking about the last couple of years. I've spent a lot of my life studying Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey specifically. And a couple of years ago, I came to the recognition that the hero's journey, for me at least, is always going to have a lot of power and helping me, look at different aspects of story in my own life. And I would say the same is true of the heroine's journey and other, models of looking at the human experience. But at the end of the day, the limitations of the hero's journey and the heroine's journey are that they are journeys focused on a single ego. So I started to ask the question a few years ago about what it looks like when a group of people go on a journey. And some of my favorite stories, like Lord of the Rings, were stories about a group of people going on a quest or a journey together. Um, the Arthurian legends, had always been favorites of mine. It's this group of knights going, on adventures together. And I started looking at the different stages that seem to arise when a group of people go on a journey. And I began this work by investigating throughout history the times when different groups went on journeys to try and accomplish something. So I looked at the women's suffrage movement. I looked at the civil rights movement, the sanitation workers' strike in India. And I began to develop a model that I've called the collective heroic journey. And I believe that the collective problems that we face as a world, as a society, are going to require collective solutions. And maybe a collective heroic journey model helps us understand some of the stages. And I have been working hard on this model. I'm working on a book around this right now. And I won't go through every stage, in the collective heroic journey, but I'll give you one example. Usually in the hero's journey, we begin with a call to adventure. And this is where an individual recognizes that things have gotten very boring where they are, and they feel like there's much more to be had outside of home. Or the other way that the hero's journey goes is that someone is forced out of their home because of some sort of disaster or death has come, and they have no choice but to go on the adventure. So while these individual journeys start with a call to adventure, the collective journey I found starts with the call of desperation. We start to hear people saying things like, this that we're experiencing now is unsustainable. Things can't keep going on like this. And when we start to hear those phrases become very common in culture and society, I think we know we're on the precipice of a collective heroic journey, because that call of desperation is usually what sends a group of people out into the world to accomplish something. Historically, that's been the case. I would say it's also the case in literature and even in our modern movies. At the time of this recording, the most successful box office film of all time is Marvel's movie, The Avengers Endgame, which is not the story of Iron Man or of Spider-Man or Captain America, but the story of all of these heroes coming together collectively to solve a problem. And I think there's something to pay attention to there, that our society, our culture is interested in how we might come together to solve these huge collective problems that we have to face. So that's why I've been working on this model around a collective heroic journey, and really believe it to be something that might can help us better understand where we're at in some of these big issues that we face.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like I bring these ideas up with a lot of people, and some people can kind of discuss them a little bit with me, but it's obvious that you've actually spent a lot of time kind of diving into this, thinking about it, agonizing about it. You're curious. It's really interesting because I've never had anybody respond by saying, well, yeah, we might need to change the story a little bit and become a little bit more collective. And it's really interesting as well, because I'm not a big, to be honest, it's hard for me to watch movies at all these days. They just don't capture me. I read a lot and I talk to people like you, and then I go watch a movie and I'm like, I'd rather just watch like live sports or something. But in particular, the comic book movies, they don't really capture me. I've always kind of been a little judgmental of them. Like, oh, these are the way that you describe it, as like, if it's just about Iron Man, if it's just about, whatever character it is, then it feels like the collective just waiting for some person to come along and save everybody. And I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's how it works. But that's a really interesting way that you put it, where if you get all of these heroes together, you have a collective story. And in reality, that's going to be how it happens. It's going to be a group of people or a movement amongst people that's going to change things. And yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, you can see that the world needs that. We need maybe a little less waiting around for one person, and we need a little bit of cohesion.
I don't know if you remember a few years ago, um, there was this story that happened over in Thailand about this soccer team that got trapped in this cave. And it was all over the news, and they've actually made a really compelling documentary. And Ron Howard actually made a great film that's up on Netflix right now around the rescue of this soccer team from in Thailand. And it's become one of my favorite films of the last few years because it is such a great example of a collective heroic journey. The rescue of that Thai soccer team, there was not one person that came in and saved the day. It was actually about 50 or 60 different people in a dozen different countries that each played a very small role in helping to coordinate an effort that eventually got those kids out of that cave without losing a single one of them. And it's an incredible story of saving the lives of these children. And it only happened because a group of people got together and didn't care who got the credit, but they came together collectively and said, you know what? There are values we all hold that we are going to work hard in order to do the piece we need to. We're going to set all our egos aside, and we all are going to unite under this one mission. Everyone played their part to a T, and the miraculous was accomplished by the rescue of these children from this cave. And I'm deeply inspired by that when I see small examples on a micro level of how human beings can work together collectively to solve what seem like impossible problems. It gives me hope that perhaps we could see people come together collectively to solve some of the world's biggest problems that we face today.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thought. And in the same way that as an individual, if you are in hopes of growing, and you're going to need to listen to those unconscious drives or bubbles that come up to you, the way that you do that is you set your ego aside, because your ego is going to, the ego is the thing that's constantly telling you, no, don't write that book. No, don't start that company. No, they'll judge you. No, you'll fail. In the same way, if you're going to work as a group and in a collective, everybody, for the objective of the group as a whole to be achieved, everybody is going to have to set aside their egos. It's an important lesson. Yeah. Well, we don't have we have maybe 5-6 minutes left. So what I want to do, this has been great. Like, I've really enjoyed just chatting, and it's been like really interesting. And like, it's kind of nice sometimes to hear somebody say back to you the things that you think about when you're working in the garden. But you've got so much going on. So one thing is that not only are you the executive director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation, but you also do write for the Myth Blast newsletter as well. And you've got some great pieces on there. I wanted to thank you, I guess, because you're kind of like running the show, I guess, over there. But I've been able to find a lot of really great people through that newsletter who have come on my podcast. I just had last week I talked to Teddy Hamstra. And like just really cool people who, similar to this conversation, we can just go down all sorts of rabbit holes that are actually really fascinating. But tell me about your Skeleton Key podcast. What's that all about? You're a co-host on that?
I am. That is a podcast that my friend Tori Yates Orr, and she's a historian that has a degree in African American studies, and we get together and look at pop culture, and we examine it through the lens of history and mythology. And we've taken on everything from professional wrestling to certain movies to Spider-Man. We've taken on just a wide variety of different pop culture topics and tried to get to the underlying stories underneath the stories, and what can we learn by holding mythology and history up to these topics, and how can we understand that mythology and history is alive today around us. And we are constantly seeing these expressions pop up out of our collective unconscious in the world. And I think it's important to shine a light on that. So that's what we try and do over at the Skeleton Key podcast.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Like having a specific like a specific lens to view it through and then analyze it. And I'm sure that there's a lot of laughter as well, some jokes.
There is. Tori and I have a great time.
Yeah, very cool. And then you've written a bunch of books, including Storytelling for Virtual Reality and the Emerald Tablet, but you have another book coming out in just a few months. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit, called The Storyteller's Almanac.
Well, that one is already out, actually. So
it's out. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe on your website, on your website, it says it comes out in September. Maybe it was 2024.
I need to get on my web people to update it. That was September of last year, actually. So
okay.
yeah, that's yeah. But that one's out, and if people are interested in learning more about storytelling, but also if you're someone who is trying to write stories in any medium, I think the Storyteller's Almanac can be of a lot of help to people who are trying to execute the telling of a story. I have two books actually that I'm working on right now that'll be hopefully coming out in the next year, and one is a book on this collective heroic journey. So that's something I'm excited about talking a lot more about. But I also have been trying to not just put every idea I have in a book right now, but to create lots of small videos around some of these ideas. And if people wanted to check out my Instagram or TikTok at Telling a Better Story, at Telling a Better Story is the handle. I'm constantly exploring this intersection of myth and the human experience, and a lot of pop culture in there as well. But please come and check out what I'm doing there. And also, at the Joseph Campbell Foundation, as you mentioned, we have a lot of work going on over at jcf.org, and subscribe to our Myth Blast newsletter. There's a different thinker every week that's writing about myth and trying to get their ideas out into the world. And there's some incredible thinkers that we're so privileged to get to work with there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've really enjoyed the Myth Blast newsletter. I think it's great. I'm looking forward to this now, having heard your thoughts a little bit about this collective idea, this collective heroic journey. I'm really interested to read the book. So when it comes out, let me know, because I would love to take a look at it. And maybe you could even come back and we could discuss it in depth. That would be awesome.
I'd love that. Love to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, I really appreciate this time that you spent with me. This has been fun. And I do look forward to doing it again.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad there are people like yourself that are initiating these conversations. I think they're really important.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you and have a great one.